the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. She opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying
Good afternoon and welcome. Politico reports Democrats plan a different kind of response to Trump's big speech. This time, according to Politico, many Democrats are signaling they'll take a less pugilistic stance. The latest sign that the party is still coming to terms with how to confront the president even as the party base grows increasingly restless. What can you expect this evening? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. Well, what is on the agenda for us today? This evening, the president is going to speak to a joint session of Congress. And it'll be very interesting to see how the Democrats respond. And in this Political piece that I opened with, they say this time many Democrats are signaling they'll take a less pugilistic stance. The latest sign that the party is still coming to terms with how to confront the president. I'm at a loss. I don't really understand why there is consternation or why there is confusion, why here we are now, what is today, the 3rd of March, and they are still, as it says in this piece, coming to terms with how to confront the president. you don't have to be pugilistic. You don't have to be confrontational. Terry, we're waiting. We're hoping that our guest joins us. You don't have to be pugilistic. You don't have to be confrontational. All you got to do is what they used to say in Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts. And you just need to continue to ask the American people, is this what you voted for? You were told this on whatever, pick a date, September 6th. You were told this October 10th. You were told this. All you have to do is lay out what he said during the campaign and then come back with the facts and say, folks, this is not how this is supposed to go. I don't think that this is what you voted for. You know, a lot of people talk waste, fraud, and abuse, waste, fraud, and abuse. And Elon Musk has come out with a number of statements about finding waste, fraud, and abuse in Social Security. But they have not presented any evidence. They keep talking about algorithms. We have these algorithms, and these algorithms are telling us that these things are occurring. Where is the evidence? If you can present me, I heard yesterday they were saying that they found one Social Security number, and I think the number that they used was and 27 different addresses have been associated with this Social Security number, and that 27 different checks have gone out under this number. Well, if that's true, I'm glad you found that. If that's true, then track it down and find the folks that are responsible and take the people to court. But present me with the evidence that this, in fact, is true. And I don't know, when it comes to fraud, I don't really know how you can tell me that you have uncovered fraud unless you've taken it through a process to determine that it was fraud. And an example of that is the Republicans love to talk about voter fraud. But when you look at the cases that they identify, if in fact they ever do identify them, what you find out is 9 times out of 10, and the number's even bigger than that, it's not fraud, it's a mistake. And so I'm not saying that all of the things that they say they are uncovering as it relates to Social Security are mistakes and not fraud. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, show me the evidence, because I don't know that those types of errors result in the dramatic cuts that they're looking to make. Get back with me. They could have found that out by running programs through SPSS or SAS using a code to detect duplicates. You're absolutely right. You're right. And I mean, you start talking about SAS. I was using SAS when I was in the PhD program back at Howard back in 2009. So you're absolutely right. Get back with me. It's not those types of mistakes, whether they are mistakes or whether they are in fact fraud. Those types of duplicate issues are not that difficult to detect. You don't have to have Elon Musk taking control of the Social Security system and rummaging through our data with read-write access to uncover those kinds of mistakes. But so what they seem to be trying to do on the Veteran Administration side, on the Social Security side, they're trying to cut the programs, or they're trying to cut a percentage of funding for the program before they actually uncover the fraud. And again, it's hard for me to believe that you have these algorithms that so here's the point. You do a forensic audit. You do this deep dive audit and you find that there's fraud. Well, then cut the fraud out. Stop paying to those fraudulent Social Security numbers. Stop paying to those fraudulent accounts. And then tell me after that, that's how much money you have saved. And instead of cutting off the top and telling me by cutting off the top that that's going to save or prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. And let me now switch over to why so many of you have joined us in the first place. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy this past Friday abruptly left the White House without signing the much touted rare earth minerals deal after negotiations blew up following an Oval Office clash. Is the deal on or off? Is the deal in limbo? Also, is the deal really the deal that Trump was heralding? My guest has written a piece, The Real Trump-Zelenskyy $500 billion minerals deal. You can find this at the World Finance Review. And he's the author of the recently published book, The Scourge of Neoliberalism, U.S. Economic Policy from Reagan to Trump. Dr. Jack Rasmus, as always, Jack, welcome back.
My pleasure.
So your piece came out just before the meltdown in the Oval Office. Before we get to the specifics of your piece, your thoughts on what you saw on Friday with Trump, Zelenskyy, and J.D. Vance.
Yeah, well, you got to understand that the fire was lit before the actual meeting. What the situation is for weeks now, it's been on again, off again, with Zelenskyy saying he agrees to the minerals deal, which has no security guarantee, just the deal. And it's been breaking down off again, on again, off again, on again for weeks. And he had agreed as a condition of coming to Washington that, now he agreed to the deal. But as soon as he got to Washington, he indicated that, no, there wasn't the deal. So he went into this meeting with Trump and Vance already probably pissed off because that was the whole purpose of the visit here, to announce the deal and have a press conference afterwards and so forth. But there was no deal. So, they were obviously fuming. And then you get into a situation where, he starts arguing with the vice president and president as if he's talking to some, junior bureaucrat across the table in Kiev. And, Trump and Vance, just got pissed off with him. And pretty much gotten into a shout match. And so you got to understand that this thing was brewing. The breakdown was brewing. It wasn't just a spontaneous thing. And it's all because this guy Zelenskyy could not really commit and stay with the deal he said he would. I mean, it reminded me of my days in the union, you know. If I had negotiated a deal with management, and then they said, yeah, we have a deal. And then I go back to my membership and I take a vote based on that deal. And then I go to the table to sign the deal and they say, no, there's no deal. You know, I mean, I would be pissed off too. I would have walked the people out on strike immediately and filed an unfair labor practice and said, okay, now if you want to come back to the table, we'll talk maybe, right? I mean, this is just bad faith bargaining. And this is the way this guy Zelenskyy does everything. You know, he's really an amateur when it comes to diplomacy, but he's pretty good salesman and getting money out of people. And the problem was with this deal that, you know, it really, its origin is there with Trump wanting to get back all the free money that Biden gave, $350 billion, no strings attached. He's given that to Ukraine, unlike the Europeans who have given them $150 billion, but with strings attached. It's a loan. You got to pay it back. Biden gave it to him with no strings attached. So Trump is trying to get that money back somehow. And really, it's a deal that was raised initially by Zelenskyy himself back in September when he said to Biden, you know, here you can have our resources in exchange for more arms and security guarantee. Well, Trump just picked up that idea once he got elected, but, you know, he just wants the money back, you know, no security guarantee because he's right. You give him a security guarantee, he's just going to continue the war. And Zelenskyy does not want an end to this war because that means an end to Zelenskyy, you see. That means he can't continue martial law. He's got to have an election and he's going to lose. So he wants to continue the war. So it's all mixed up here. All this politics about who originated the deal, you know, how much was it, and not getting paid back, and then him reneging several times. This is the fourth time he's reneged on the deal, actually. And he's misled the Trump administration into thinking there was a deal. And that's why he comes to Washington. Then he says, no deal, you know. I mean, it's crazy what's going on. But, you know, he's jumped off the American horse now. He's got the $350 billion. You're not going to get any more. And now he's going to go ride the European horse, right? And they're going to give him money. So that's kind of in a nutshell what's going on here. I can't hear you, Wilmer.
I found it quite odd, at least in the clips that I saw, that, and I watched it live as it was unfolding. Rubio was conspicuously silent, and as the Secretary of State, all that chirping that J.D. Vance was doing should have been coming, in my opinion, should have been coming from Marco Rubio, because he's the Secretary of State, and this was an international issue. I interpret that to be, this was planned between, from the Trump side. Well, in fact, no, you know what? I've stopped using the word planned because I don't want to, this was provoked. Let me say that. I'll put it that way. This was, I believe, provoked by the Trump side. And I don't think Marco Rubio wanted any part of it, which is why he looked so as uncomfortable as he did and did not say anything when, again, as the Secretary of State, that should have been his job.
Well, he may have negotiated the deal and communicated to Trump that, look, we have a deal now. He's finally going to come. He's going to sign. And, you know, he communicated that to Trump, Rubio. And then the guy comes and he doesn't sign. So, you know, he's got a little bit of egg on his face, too. There could be a lot of reasons why he just sat there. You know, politicians, if someone else is carrying their water for them, why should they jump in and help carry it themselves? We can't know for sure. You know, your interpretation may be right. it's kind of hard to tell who provoked what. There's some rumors that under his tongue here, Zelensky called Vance a bitch, in Ukrainian. That's the report in some of the media. He used a Ukrainian phrase, which translated means fucking bitch. I don't know, but obviously there was bad blood before they all sat down. They were all on edge here very clearly. And it didn't take much to provoke something. And, probably the Trump administration is still, kind of fuming about the role of Zelensky, promoting Biden coming to the U.S. and promoting Biden. He's got no love lost for the guy, obviously. So there's a lot of reasons why, Trump and Vance were probably sitting there just looking for a wrong statement to jump on him. And he gave it to him,
So what was Zelensky's original offer?
Zelensky's original offer back September to Biden was, look, you continue to give us arms and you have access. We will have this deal. You support us. You give us a security agreement. You give us more arms and you can pay for them by taking our resources. That was the original deal. You see, it's tied up with the security agreement and more arms. Well, Trump picks that up and says, okay, we like the deal, but no security agreement for you. In other words, no continued war guarantee, because we want you to come to a compromise and start negotiating, Vladimir. But it's very clear you don't want to. And if we continue to give you a money and security agreement, you will never come to a negotiating table. You see, that's where Trump's coming from. He's got a different interpretation of that deal than Zelensky got. Zelensky's interpretation, he's trying to adhere to the old September deal with Biden, which is, resources in exchange for continuing the war. Trump wants, okay, you didn't pay us for these resources. Europe got a better deal with you. We want the same deal with Europe. We want to get our money back, and if you've given that deal to Europe, you should give it to us, but no security. That's the crux of the problem here. There's no security agreement, no continuing of the war, because the obstacle to negotiations is clearly Zelensky. He doesn't want to end the war because it means an end to Zelensky, you see? So they're all caught in between a rock and a hard place, and neither side will really agree to break their position. And the Europeans allow it all to continue because they're sitting, behind it saying, well, we'll give you more money. Well, where are they going to get the money? Right? Where are they going to get it? They're going to get it from the $330 billion of frozen Russian assets in their banks. And what they're going to do now is they're going to take those frozen assets and they're going to buy U.S. weapons to give to Ukraine. You see, that's how crazy the whole thing is. The Europeans are now sitting over there. They got their emergency meeting. And, the big headlines in the U.S. mainstream media today is that, they're going to come up with a peace deal. Bullshit. They're coming up with a war deal and they're calling it a peace deal, and they're going to use the American weapons anyway. You see, so Ukraine and Zelensky is playing both sides. He's playing the U.S. and he's playing the Europeans, and he's getting what he wants, which is more money and a continuation of the war.
Before we get into the mineral aspect of this, part of the narrative from the West is that Trump has lost the opportunity to make peace. And I'm trying to figure out if there's any real rationale there for a couple of reasons. One, obviously Zelensky doesn't want it. But two, Zelensky is the United States puppet. And the United States could put an end to this as soon as they really decide to put an end to it. The question is, how do they walk away and save face? That to me is the crux of the real problem. How does the United States walk away from a conflict that it started and save face in the process?
Well, they walk away by signing a separate deal with the Russians. And I think that's inevitable right now. So the whole war is going to be dumped on the Europeans, who want to continue the war, by the way. The Europeans are in total agreement that the war should continue. You see, they're really, one and one with Zelenskyy here. They really believe that another year of war, in 2026, the Russians will collapse. This is what they've been saying, since the war began. Oh, the Russian economy and the political system will collapse. Well, if you listen to what they're saying, the European leaders and generals and, in NATO over there, they really believe that we'll continue this war. We're going to one more year, we're going to win. So we got to continue the war.
We're one wonder weapon away. But
it's always game changer.
A year ago, it was the wonder weapon. Oh, if we just get some more Abrams tanks. Oh, if we just get some
F-16s, and if we can get the javelins, and if we can get the HIMARS, it's nonsense. Look, Europe does not have a defense industry. It's been totally under the American umbrella. And what Trump is doing is he's going to pull out of NATO, maybe in steps, and the Europeans now have this emergency meeting, and they're really talking not only about continuing the Ukraine war, but spending $700-800 billion to develop their own defense industry. The problem is, you don't build military manufacturing overnight. And even their military experts say it's going to take 4 or 5 years for Europe to do that. So how are they going to continue the war in the meantime? Well, they got the $330 billion of frozen Russian assets. And the real problem is going to be when they want to buy U.S. weapons. Does Trump say, no, you can't buy U.S. weapons? When the U.S. weapons company want to sell those weapons, The problem is here, there's the Europeans now. The Europeans want to continue the war. U.S. is going to pull out of the war with Trump, right? But the Europeans are going to continue it. And they can't defeat Russia. They can't. They can spend all that money, and you can't defeat Russia on the ground with conventional weapons. All they've got are some nuclear weapons, and it's going to come down, I think, to brinkmanship here eventually. By the Europeans, because they have no real military apparatus. I mean, look at UK. It's a basket case. Its economy is a basket case. They've got 40,000 only combat-ready troops. That's all they have. They can't even recruit people to man their ships. Their ships are stuck in a harbor because they don't have enough sailors, right? It's a joke. Europe is a joke militarily. But they're sitting on that pot of money, and they're going to buy U.S. weapons. And Trump's going to say, hey, go for it if you want. We're going to cut a separate deal with Russia. That's what I think is going to happen. There'll be a separate deal with Russia. Trump's going to, wash his hands of the whole damn thing. But the Europeans have this angle into the U.S., and that's through the Democrat Party and the mainstream media. And they're going to put pressure on Trump and the administration through the Democrats, through the mainstream media, who are also totally committed to continuing the war over there. In the bigger picture, Wilmer, why is Trump taking these different positions and looking like he wants to pull out of there? I'll tell you why. Because the U.S. empire cannot afford the current structure that it has to finance and keep the empire going. It's got to pull back. It's too expensive. NATO's too expensive. These wars are too expensive. 800 military bases around the world is too expensive. U.S. aid, NED, everything. They're pulling back the expenses. They're looking to how to restructure their foreign expenses and their domestic expenses too, because you see the domestic policy and the foreign policy are tied. What you see going on with Doge and everything is you can't keep running $2 trillion a year deficits and $36 trillion national debt, of which we're paying $1 trillion in bond interest to the rich and the bondholders now. And the Congressional Budget Office says in 10 years, if you continue, the national debt's going to be $56 trillion, and you're going to be paying $1.7 trillion to the bondholders. You can't pay $1.7 trillion to the bondholders and the same amount to the Pentagon and keep the empire going without restructuring it financially. That's what this is ultimately about.
It's going to be, well, two things. One, you just mentioned that Trump's going to cut a side deal with Putin, and you talked about the Democratic Party and the mainstream media are going to put pressure on Trump, and they're already doing that. I couldn't put my hands on it, but there was an article in the Washington Post this morning asking the question, why is Donald Trump taking Putin's side in this conflict? And to me, that's just an example of what it is that you're talking about. And the other thing, and Kevin Baptiste, thank you so much for that super sticker. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. The other thing is that that must be one heck of a conversation that Donald Trump is going to have with Vladimir Putin when Putin says, "Why are you allowing the Europeans to keep my money? You want to cut a deal with me? I want my money back. I want my sovereign my sovereign fund back. Go get my money."
Yeah, well, Trump can't force the Europeans to pay up any more than the Europeans can force Trump to pay up. You got to split. You got to split in the empire, in the political empire, over NATO. The U.S. looks at NATO and says, "Why do we need NATO?" I mean, it's just blood sucking the U.S. Financially here, and because the Europeans aren't paying for themselves. This has always been a Trump position. The Europeans should pay up; they should pay for themselves, and he's right there. They got a free ride, and because they have no real defense costs, they can provide all these nice social benefits to their people. Mm-hmm. Once they start, developing their own military, $1 trillion is going to cost them in the next 5 years. You watch those social benefits in Europe go away.
Well, we're already seeing that's already
been happening. Already beginning, but it's going to accelerate now. It's going to accelerate, right?
They've been going neoliberal, and what's the other term I'm looking for? They've been going austerity. They've been going. We can go all the way back to Greece and Italy. What was that about 15 years ago, when they were introducing austerity measures into Greece, when they were talking about selling the Parthenon?
Yeah. Well, that was all Southern Europe. That was all the financial crash engineered by Northern Europe banks, anyway.
Right.
But
Oh no, I'm not saying that was related to this. What I'm saying is the introduction of austerity measures for a number of different reasons. We've been seeing that manifesting itself in Europe for about 15 years.
Right, but it's all accelerating now because the economy in Europe has been terrible for 10 years now. They just can't get it going. And the same thing in the U.S. The economy is just sort of stumbling along a little bit better, but not that much better. And how are they going to keep funding the empire without finding some money somewhere else, cutting social programs? So that's going on right now in the U.S. Austerity is here in the U.S. It's coming in Europe big time. But it's all because of the Western empire. The U.S. empire cannot finance itself the way it's currently structured. So we're at the beginning stage of a restructuring of that empire to save money somehow. And there's differences over how to do that. But, to get to your point, I don't think Putin's going to ask Trump to do that because Trump can't. There's no way he can do it. All Trump can do is pull out of NATO, right? Which I think he's going to do in stages to cut costs. Right? I don't think Putin has any illusions that the Europeans, want to continue the war on their own and they're going to steal his money to do it. He knows that. And they probably accepted that, in Russia. I think when the U.S. strikes a separate deal with Putin here about getting the U.S. out of the war, then you're going to see an escalation of that war on the part of the Russians. I think the Russians have been sort of holding back the last month or so. You know, they haven't really been pushing that hard militarily. They were at the end of the year until Trump got elected. Now they're trying to see what happens here. Can Trump get his allies in Europe all together and get this guy Zelenskyy out of there so they can start negotiating or not? Well, it's clear that he can't. You know, that's done. That's dead. There's no way Trump is going to get Zelenskyy out of there because Zelenskyy, you know, has jumped off the U.S. horse and he's jumped on the European horse, and they've, you know, embraced him even in the videos, and they're going to give him whatever he wants financially because they're going to take Russia's money to give to him whatever he wants, and they're going to buy U.S. weapons, you know. So they're going to continue the war, and I think the Russians now are going to come to that conclusion, and I think you're going to see an escalation of the conflict on the ground going on here, you know, the next several months. And Trump's going to sit back and say, see, I told you so. I told you so, Europe. I told you so, Zelenskyy. You can't win this. You got to negotiate. Cut your losses. I mean, he's a business guy. Cut your losses on your deal, you know. Make the best deal you can in the situation. But Zelenskyy, that means the end of Zelenskyy. And he knows it. He's got nothing to lose by continuing the war. He's going to continue it, which means he's never going to negotiate. He's going to talk like he is, but when it comes right down to it, he's going to flip-flop and he's not going to negotiate. And the Europeans are all okay with that because they believe it too. I mean, if you listen to Europe, what's going on, you read the media and the press over there, they're trying to fearmonger their people and say, oh, this is 1938 again, and the Russians are coming if you don't stop them in Ukraine. And other such nonsense, you know? I mean, think about it historically. The Russians right now have maybe a million and a half, you know, military force at arms, whatever. Half of them are in Ukraine, and most of the rest are just in bases, you know, throughout Russia. How the hell are they going to invade Western Europe? They don't have the forces to do that. I mean, during World War II, it took 3 to 4 million Russians just to clear the Nazis just out of Ukraine. It took 15 million to go into Europe. The Russians don't have those forces today. Oh, but they're fear-mongering people. They're whipping the Europeans up to thinking, oh, if we don't continue with this war, you know, what's going to happen is it going to be in Warsaw and then Berlin, you know, within 6 months. That's how you maintain public support for wars. You see, you scare the shit out of everybody. And that's what they're doing over there, which means they want to continue this war. The problem is Europe right now continuing the war because they're going to steal the money to pay for it.
And I've not heard one thing from Vladimir Putin over the last 5 years that validates anything that Joe Biden was saying about, we know this is what he wants to do. We know this is what he wants to do, but never offered any evidence to support the accusation. Getting back to this deal, the reports that I read were very clear that yes, we know there are strategic minerals in Ukraine, but they don't know how much of a reserve there actually is. That it would take almost 20 years before anybody really started seeing any production / profit from a deal of this nature. So for Donald Trump to be talking about this is a great deal, this is a phenomenal deal, no, the details were yet to be determined.
All the details were yet to be determined. You see, even this deal that they thought that they had is just generalities. There was no specifics, you know, about how much money, even whether it was 500 billion or not, or what the mechanisms of the wealth sharing of these minerals might be. It was a PR statement. They went into this meeting on Saturday. I mean, on Friday. It was a PR statement, right? But it would look good for Trump. He's got a deal, right? And make it look like, well, you know, Biden gave the store away. We're going to get some of it back, maybe, you know. It would look,
and we don't know when.
it looked good from a business PR point of view. And I think that's all Trump wanted. That's why Trump was so pissed off when Zelenskyy, gave it the deep six, right? I mean, he couldn't even get that out of him. Zelenskyy used it as an opportunity to really try to make the administration look bad, right? Oh, they broke down again. Because he knew in his back pocket he had Europe, you see, and Europe would give him a better deal. So he didn't really have to cut a deal with the U.S., right? I mean, it didn't turn out exactly, good PR for him the way it happened. But he's playing both sides. He's playing both sides. And, he jumps from one to the other and he's getting his way. And that really aggravates Trump. Here's this little pissant guy, and he's manipulating us and manipulating the Europeans and getting away with it. And we can't have a bigger, better deal with Russia and therefore all of the BRICS in the global south, because that's where Trump is really looking at. That's where the U.S. interests really are. He wants to put this silly Ukraine thing, which is not in the interest of the U.S. in the long term, that Biden got us stuck into. He wants to look at the big deal, which is the rest of the world. He has to turn and strike some sort of arrangement with the BRICS, with China, with Russia, long term for the U.S. empire to continue. And he knows it. And instead, we're stuck in this this swamp called Ukraine. You see, you got to understand the big picture here and where Trump is trying to go because of the empire's in trouble, right? And Ukraine's holding it up and Zelensky's holding it up and the dumb Europeans are holding it up. So the U.S. is getting frustrated with all of this stuff.
Let's switch gears a little bit. President Trump said today that tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada will go into effect tomorrow, ending a month-long delay that saw both our neighbor to the north, Canada, and our neighbor to the south scramble to head off the trade action. What do you really see? Because the rationales that I've heard for this just don't make sense. And the fentanyl argument just doesn't make sense. Imposing tariffs on Canadian syrup and auto parts, it doesn't make any sense. So, Dr. Jack, this looks like it's going to take us into recession even faster than anticipated.
Well, you got to understand, what are the purpose of tariffs, right? Is it to correct a negative trade balance between the two countries? Okay, that's one academic argument, right? Is it to use tariffs to get these countries to abide by other objectives the U.S. wants them to, like immigration, right? Or is it about to raise revenue? You got to realize Trump's first trade war back when he was, first elected the first term, really failed. They were targeting mostly China with tariffs, and to some extent, Europe and Mexico and Canada a little bit, right? But while those tariffs failed in those objectives, they succeeded in generating some pretty good revenue, right? And even Biden continued the revenue. He didn't eliminate the tariffs; he continued the revenue. You got to understand Trump's main purpose for the tariffs, in my view, are to force this immigration thing and also to raise money. He wants to raise tariff revenues significantly to offset the tax cuts for business that are coming, you see? Mm-hmm. Because if he doesn't, you got $2 trillion a year continued deficit. So it's a revenue raising objective, I think, that he's talking about. Now, tariffs won't raise that much revenue, but it'll help raise some of the revenue. Cutting all this U.S. aid and so forth will help with the revenue, balance, the budget to some extent. They'll never balance the budget, but they'll reduce it from 2 trillion to 1 trillion, maybe. So it's revenue raising that the tariffs are really about. I mean, if you look at how much of a deficit we've got with Canada and Mexico combined. It's about last year, I think it was a little over 200 billion a year deficit. If you look at the deficit we've got with Asia, China, and the countries over there, it's almost 700 billion. The real problem, if you're talking about deficits, right, is Asia. It's not Mexico, and it's not Canada. Oh, but they got to make it look like, it's a general thing here. And they're trying to raise revenue everywhere, even from Europe. This is all part, once again, of the empire not having enough money to continue. And they're restructuring the domestic spending and the foreign spending as part of restructuring the finances of the empire. And the tariffs are part of that. That's all. They're just part of that. That's the way I see it. It's mostly about revenue raising and part of his whole general picture, Doge and cut spending and cut foreign aid and, get tax cuts going, hoping it generates more business and more income, which it won't. It's a multi-part strategy here that's financial. And I think that's how you need to read the tariffs moves that he's making. And also, to put pressure on Mexico, particularly for the immigration, which is working, by the way. The Mexicans are responding in terms of, intercepting all these people from Central and South America coming up through Mexico. They put 10,000 troops on the border now. They are arresting and extraditing all these, fentanyl drug guys, in Mexico. And they're making all kind of moves. President Sheinbaum of Mexico is staying ahead of this curve, and agreeing to a lot here. But that's what it's really about, because if he can say he's cut the immigration, well, that's a big political win for him, right? It makes him look good. That was one of his main issues. Right. And he has done that. The immigration's way, way down here. I think the rate of immigration in the first quarter across Mexico is about the same as it was in the 1960s. So he can say that's a big win, right? Tariffs are a weapon for other political purposes. They are a means of raising revenue, and that's what it's mostly about.
But when I look at what Canada's response could be, it would be to put a tariff on American bourbon. So that hits Kentucky and some of the other southern states, which are red states. There will be a tariff on Ford truck parts, which are coming from Canada. That means you look at the demographic of those who buy those F-150 trucks, particularly those, I think, in the Midwest is where a lot of those trucks and parts go. That means folks in red states will be paying more for their trucks. They'll also be paying more for the oil that comes from Canada, which I think is formulated to accommodate those in the Midwest red states. So just looking at those 3 or 4 things, the folks that are going to bear the brunt, the Americans that are going to bear the brunt of Donald Trump's tariffs as it relates to Canada will be people in the Midwest. That'll be basically his base.
Yeah, well, obviously part of the reason for the tariffs is to force production and investment that's moved offshore for the last 40 years, right? As a result of neoliberal policies, offshoring of a lot of American production. Part of the purpose is to force these companies, U.S. companies, to come back. I mean, that was Biden's strategy too. Biden threw $1.7 trillion as a carrot to try to bribe these companies back to the U.S. That doesn't happen overnight, right? If you bribe them or if you threaten them with tariffs, it's going to take time. It's not going to happen the first year, 2 years. And yeah, there's going to be some pain there. Some of it will come back. Prices will rise on some goods, right? I don't think it's 25% increase across the board. Right. You're going to see companies that have U.S. companies that have a monopolistic position in their industry and can raise prices because they control supply. They're the ones who will do the price gouging and raising of prices, probably even higher in some select goods than the the level of the tariffs. So there will be some inflation, no doubt. It won't be as much as people say it will be. And there will be some relocation onshoring, but that'll take some time. And yeah, there's going to be some pain in the interim. I mean, you can't offshore U.S. industry for 40 years and think you're going to bring it back in 2 or even 4, and there's not going to be any disruption or pain for doing it. It will, no doubt. But I think that's where both parties have been heading. They just have a different strategy for it now.
So as we close, you released your piece the day before the meltdown, but in reading, I still strongly suggest that people read your piece, because is the deal dead? Is the deal in limbo?
It's dead. It's dead. Yeah, they're not going to resurrect that deal now. I mean, Trump has been burned 4 times. He's not going to do it. He's not going to get played again, right? And it's dead. It wasn't very much to begin with, as I said. It was kind of more like a statement of principles of where they were going. So there's really not much cost economically to it. And he probably, as you pointed out, wasn't going to get much out of it anyway. Mm-hmm. But let me finish with this. You know, you got to understand that since 2014, U.S. and European companies have penetrated Ukraine deeply. They are deeply entrenched in Ukraine. In all kind of businesses. You know, one time I went and I looked at all the chambers of commerce in these major Ukrainian cities, and they're full of American companies, full of it. And I think part of this deal was, to buy off some of these American companies for the dislocation and so forth of getting out of Ukraine. But they're deeply involved. How did they get so deeply involved? Oh, well, when the U.S. engineered the coup in 2014, within a year, Ukraine appointed the U.S. neocon who engineered it, Victoria Nuland. They appointed Victoria Nuland czar for the Ukrainian economy. They even had to change their constitution to let a foreigner be a czar. Once she was the czar, and by the way, she's a finance capitalist out of Chicago originally. Once they appointed her as the czar, these American and European companies flooded into Ukraine. They're all over the place with investments, BlackRock and everything. They're all over Ukraine there. So you can't ignore the economic connections to this war. It's not just the military industrial complex making a lot of money and some money at risk here. It's all these companies in Ukraine. And I think part of the deal was, U.S. wasn't going to use it just to rebuild Ukraine. They were going to put some of the money back to the U.S. Treasury, and they were going to divvy out the money, I think, to these American companies as a cost of exiting and whatever.
And don't forget, you always got to have 10% for the big guy.
That's right. You always got to skim some off the top.
You got to have 10. You got to have 10% for the big guy. Larry asked, and I'm gonna see if I can make sense of this. Why go through this same motion with the American taxpayer on this matter? Can you and Dr. Rasmus explain? Larry, which matter are you referring to? Are you talking about the war in Ukraine? Are you talking about the tariffs issues? Oh, tariffs. Okay. So why go through this motion with the tariffs with the American taxpayer? Go ahead, Jack.
To raise money. As I said, tariffs is a big, one of his big ways of raising money to pay for the $4 trillion tax cuts. And it's, by the way, it's not just $4 billion continuing the tax cuts for business. Those tax cuts were passed back in 2017, by the way. It's continuing those tax cuts, you see. But there's 1.1 trillion more in consumer tax cuts being proposed. I'm talking about no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, raising the SALT deduction to 20,000 instead of 10, and removing finally taxing of Social Security benefits that Reagan imposed. That amounts over a decade to 1.1 trillion. That's supposed to stimulate the economy, right? Well, those tax cuts are going to reduce revenues. You got to make up this revenue somehow. Raising tariffs is one of the ways. Another way is they think these taxes are going to stimulate investment and more tax revenue, which I don't believe is going to happen, right? So they're looking for ways of offsetting all of the cuts, the tax cuts here. We've cut taxes $17 trillion since 2001. We've spent $9 trillion on wars. There's 26 trillion of your 36 trillion national debt and deficits right there. The rest is the bailouts, in 2009, 10, and in 2021. And interest on the debt now, that's $1 trillion a year, right? There's your national debt. There's your deficit. Oh, but they're not talking about, the sources of it. They're talking about, we got to cut, Doge has got to cut $200,000, $200 billion a year out of laying off federal workers, right? Actually, they'll dump those costs on the state. They'll just take those programs like education and give it back to the states. Let the states run the deficit, right? That's part of the solution. There's many solutions. I'm going to talk about all of this picture here on my radio show on Friday, Alternative Visions on the Progressive Radio Network.
One of the things they said was, we're not cutting programs, we're cutting expenditures.
Yeah.
And if the states want to continue the program, where's the state going to get the money to continue the program, especially since the Reagan administration, block grant programs have been cut, revenue sharing programs have been cut. The money isn't there.
That's right. You can move it around, but it's not there, right? You're moving around, fiction, right? But most of the cuts will have to be in the big states like California, New York, and so forth, Well, they happen to be blue states, right? So there's a political objective here as well. Blame Gavin Newsom for the cuts he's going to have to make. Don't blame me that, we're not giving the states money anymore.
And to that point, Get Back With Me asks, why does Trump always say the tariffs will not affect Americans? In fact, he was asked that question during the press conference, and he just blew it off as, no, you're wrong. No, you're wrong.
No, well, that's not an answer. It will affect Americans, but not as much as they're fear-mongering in the mainstream media. I don't think it's going to be certain goods, okay? But then you got to ask yourself, are the tariffs raising the price? Or is it the companies, the corporations who use the tariffs to price gouge us and to pass it all on to us and then some, rather than taking it out of their profits? Who's really at fault here? Is it just the tariffs? No, it's the corporate response to the tariffs that's going to be responsible for the inflation. There'll be some inflation, but you got to remember, tariffs deal mostly just with goods flows. Goods. Goods are only 20% of the economy. 80% is services, and that's not involved with tariffs here virtually at all. And where is the inflation coming on services? Well, it's coming in rents, right? It's coming in medical, utilities, insurances, auto repair. That's where the inflation is. It's not in goods, So the tariffs will raise the price of goods selectively to some extent. But the big problem with inflation is the price gouging going on by landlords and all the rest of them. That's just continuing. That's the problem.
Final question. I was listening to Meet the Press on Sunday, and Bernie Sanders, much to my surprise, said, I have put forth proposed legislation in the budget bill to remove the ceiling on the Social Security tax. He said that will make Social Security solvent for the next 50 years. Hearing him say that, I thought was phenomenal.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, Bernie and the so-called progressives, they talk the talk when they're out of office. But when they're in office, they don't walk the walk. It's very easy to make it sound good that you're going to do all this. And we've gotten this from Bernie for 8 years now. He sounds good, right? But he doesn't do diddle when he's in. He goes along with with Biden for dropping the Build Back Better plan and everything, So when I hear Bernie and these progressive Democrats, so-called, I don't get impressed because, been there, seen it several times now. Don't put your hopes, in that. That's my reaction to that. It's good. I support it, but he ain't gonna deliver on that.
I'm with you on that. Dr. Jack Rasmus, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. Look forward to having you back.
My pleasure. Anytime. I'm sure there'll be a lot to talk about within a couple of weeks, even.
I think so. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. And stay tuned. New episode tomorrow. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. If you can help with that Patreon account, we greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate it. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, and that talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Wilmer Leon. Have a great, great remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.